Share the profits with labor. Sunday, December 2nd, 1934. After 5 years of so-called depression, the capitalist and the laborer are both convinced that industrial affairs have arrived at a deadlock. Under the present capitalistic, financial, and industrial and scientific arrangements, there is nothing left for this nation to do except proceed backwards like a snail. Our experiment of borrowing ourselves out of debt with bankers' bonds has proven to be a miserable failure. The 500,000 more men who are out of work this year than last year constitute an appalling fact, as does the kindred fact that our national dole for emergency relief has doubled from August 1933 to August 1934. There is only one way of reading scientifically the thermometer of prosperity. This method is definitely related to how many men we have to put back to profitable work. A correct reading forces us to conclude that the mercury has been on the downward trend. This is true despite the fact that business is better and that dividends for stockholders have increased. But 85% of the American people will always be more concerned with the profits accruing to the laborer and to the farmer than with the capitalistic profits which are pouring into the pocketbooks of the fortunate few. America cannot prosper unless labor prospers. This truism is well known to the United States Chamber of Commerce as it is to every citizen. Thus the Chamber is about to marshal its forces for the purposes of ending the Depression by putting the millions of unemployed back to work. Back to work, say I? But upon what basis? Back to profitable work or merely back to work? Back to work so that the family can live according to the American standard and enjoy both the necessities and conveniences of those things which are within our grasp, or back to work on the basis of a lower standard from whose depths we will bid farewell to the things we dreamed about and to the life we planned. I seriously doubt the ability of industry under the present policies to put 1 million men back to work, let alone the 11 or 12 million idle men who are in our nation. But granting the ability of the Chamber of Commerce to accomplish this Herculean task, what method will it employ? All we have to judge by is its official pronouncement, which was published in September 1932 in that issue of Nation's Business. It said, "Adjustment in working hours in industry is having the attention of the Special Committee of the Department of Manufacture. This committee is endeavoring to suggest general policies which should govern businessmen in making the necessary adjustments in industrial operations brought about by present conditions. As one of its activities, the committee is participating in and giving assistance to the national Share the Work movement." Now let us see what is wrong with this seemingly sane proposal. My friends, the bald fact is this: we are not so much interested in any Share the Work movement as we are vitally interested in a Share the Profit movement. This is the point that the gentlemen from the Chamber of Commerce totally overlook. Share the Workism is the Siamese twin to share povertyism. To share the work without sharing the profits, as contemplated by the Chamber of Commerce, means that a laborer who now obtains $25 a week must be satisfied with approximately $15 a week. This assertion I shall substantiate in a moment by undeniable facts. Not once did it enter into the concept of these Aristotelian geniuses who preside over the destinies of the Chamber of Commerce that mass production machinery is constantly displacing labor, and, therefore, the constant displacement of labor inevitably leads to more sharing of work and to more sharing of depleted pay envelopes. This holds true unless share the work is accompanied by a substantial sharing of profits. This, their capitalistic money system cannot afford to face. This, their capitalistic economic system that was designed for production at a profit to the owner of a factory cannot do. I forewarn you, my friends, be not misled by any half-truth and half-baked policy which will advocate a 30-hour work week or even a 20-hour work week unless it envisions a yearly salary sufficient to meet the requirements of your standard of living. Be not misled by any such trick legislation which will now be proposed. It offers you a rainbow bubble which will vanish into thin air the moment you attempt to grasp it. Share the work means share the poverty. It is a fallacy which, like a hidden dagger, lies beneath the cloak of beneficence, a dagger which will strike you down in cold blood of abject poverty if you succumb to its arguments. And now for the facts to substantiate these statements. The following figures were taken from the official federal reports and from the report on the national income and its purchasing power as prepared by our National Bureau of Economic Research. 1. In 1919, we had in the United States of America 274,402 manufacturing establishments. By 1927, 8 years later, despite our increase in population and our increase in exports, these manufacturing establishments decreased by 30%, leaving only 191,866 manufacturing plants in operation. These figures prove to you that there was a tendency towards monopolization, that business, as conducted in this nation, was programmed and geared only for the few. It was fast becoming a grim reality that, in the United States, there was no place for the small businessman. Only the plant which was associated with a large banking house could secure loans to purchase labor-saving machinery. The little industrialist, who refused to sell his birthright and share his profits, not with the laborer but with the banker, gradually was being eased out of industry. All this might fall under the heading of unjust competition. 2. In 1919, these manufacturing plants employed 9,039,171 wage earners. 8 years later, this wage-earning group was reduced to 8,349,755. Here again we find, despite our increased population and exports, fewer laborers were required, a decrease of 689,416. 3. According to official figures, the factories in the past 10 years, ending with 1933, produced 42% more merchandise with 500,000 fewer factory workers than they did in the 10 previous years. And in the prosperous year of 1929, industries upon which 40% of our wage earners depended for a living employed 900,000 fewer wage earners than they did in 1919, although the 1929 production was 50% greater. Our railroads, for example, have increased their business 7% with 250,000 fewer employees. Our coal mines surrendered 23% more coal with approximately 100,000 fewer miners. A tremendous increase in production of textiles or motor cars, of practically every mass production article was noticeable, while there was a marked decrease in the number of laborers employed. Perhaps you are beginning to see why I condemn that program of share the work. Year by year, despite a decrease in the number of manufacturing institutions, there was a gradual increase in the number of articles produced, accompanied by a falling off in the number of men employed. In this year of 1939, do the proponents of Share the Work propose to turn back the hands of the clock of progress? Dare they suggest that we go back to the handsaw and scrap the power saw? Why, such a suggestion is hostile to reason. The scientist is not going to vanish. The engineer of tomorrow does not plan to put his brains in cold storage. The fact is, there will be fewer factories and fewer laborers required 5 years hence than there are today, and there will be greater production 5 years hence than there is today. Are you in favor of share the work and share the poverty when it is a proven truth that there is less need for mass production manual labor? My friends, we have arrived at that period in the cycle of development when idleness must be translated into leisure. Man has won his victory over the menacing mysteries of the unkind elements. The old tools have given place to the new. The wheel, the nail, the spade, and the broad axe belong to the past. Steam, electricity, the power lathe, a myriad number of automatic devices have outmoded them all. The battle for production has been won. Henceforward, less and less factory labor is required. If that be so, are we prepared to adopt the program of share the work, share the pay envelope, and share the poverty with all the profits gravitating towards those who own the factories? This is the cycle of development which cries aloud for a share in the profits. 4. Now let us change our point of vantage and view these facts from a different angle. In 1914, the value of the products manufactured in our industrial establishments was approximately $24 billion. In 1921, this value increased to $44 billion. In 1923, it skyrocketed to $60 billion, while in 1929, it reached the stupendous figure of $69 billion. Not only was power concentrated into the hands of fewer industrialists, not only did our population increase by more than 25 million persons, not only did the wealth produced by these industrialists increase almost 300%, the astounding and frightful figure associated with all this is that there was a steady, devastating decrease in employment and in wages also. The more business carried on, the fewer people were employed. 5. As far as the wage decrease, which accompanied the wealth increase, is concerned, let us put these official figures on the books of our memories. In 1923, when modern capitalism was in bloom and the total volume of wages paid to working men in the manufacturing industries was $11.7 billion. In 1929, when the annual value of our manufactured products had increased $9 billion over the 1923 total, the volume of wages in the manufacturing industries was still approximately 11 billion. Need I ask you who shared in this profit of 9 billion more wealth? It was not the working man. It was the financially controlled industrialist who appears before you today with his program of share the work as he shirks the inevitable program of sharing the profits. To emphasize this point, let me explain to you that while the total wages paid to the working men during these years of increased production scarcely varied, in 1922 the total dividends paid to the owners of industry by all corporations in the United States was $930,648,000. In 1929, these dividends increased to $3,478 million, an increase of 356% for the owners of industry, but hardly a dollar's increase for the laborers employed in the industry. Do not these figures impress you with the fact that what the laboring man requires in this nation is not so much a share the work program as a share the profit program? 6. To express the same thought with figures as recent as 1929, we learned from the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation just last week that out of 50 million bank depositors, 800,000 of them had control of 2/3 of the total bank deposits in the nation. We learned that 71% of American families had incomes in 1929, a prosperous year, mind you, of less than $2,500, when the sum of $2,500 is necessary to maintain a decent American standard of living. Today, in the year of 1934, the average laborer is receiving less than $1,000 a year, and the cost of living is well proportioned to $1,500 a year. To state it conservatively, 71% of our people are living in abject poverty. There is no other name for it. We learn that 1 1/5% of our American families received 1/4 of the total income produced by the United States, and the remaining 3/4 of that income was left to 98 4/5% of the balance of the American people. This was in 1929. Today, it is far more acute than it was in that year. This is what I so often referred to as the concentration of wealth in the hands of a few. This is the system of modern capitalism, which from governmental analysis proves beyond dispute or question that there is no just sharing of profits in this nation. This is the capitalistic system which the United States Chamber of Commerce endeavors to foist upon you men and women with their damnable slogan of share the work. Finally, these are the figures known by everybody in Washington from president to page boy as they enter the halls of Congress to rectify the ills of a so-called depression. I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, if you will be patient with your representatives or your senators as they argue and debate over negligible matters and refuse to outlaw this legally protected banditry of capitalism. The ever-increasing number of propertyless wage earners and the superabundant riches of the fortunate few are unanswerable arguments that the earthly goods so lavishly produced in this age of mass productionism are far from rightly distributed and shared amongst the various classes of men. Over a period of more than 50 years, capitalism forgot that it could not survive unless purchasing power and profitable private ownership were shared with the laboring class. Industry, with its savage individualism, was in business for the profits to be gained therefrom. Its god was the gold of profits, its high priest the banker, and its Bible was the gospel of greed. The time has arrived when both citizen and congressman are well informed, I repeat, as to the inherent rottenness of capitalism. The time has come when, if these congressmen refuse to legislate against the concentration of wealth and for the distribution of profits, then we are perfectly justified in accusing them of playing politics with misery and of having sold the temple back to the bankers. We are through, at least for this afternoon, with the citation of figures. Saving our sanity, we dare not reject them. Under the compulsion of reason, we must face the two realities which they unfold to us. First, there is the blessing of technical unemployment, as we clumsily call it. Tools have been perfected. Science has progressed. We have arrived at the point in civilization when it is no longer necessary to figure out how to get 12 million men back to steady, constant factory labor. This is a problem similar to the one of trying to make a square peg fit into a round hole. Our task is identified with how to distribute the profits which have been piled up through the use of mechanical devices. Watt and Stephenson, Fulton and Edison, these and 1,000 other scientists, by harnessing the forces of nature, have taught us how to share the work with machinery long before the United States Chamber of Commerce revived the heresy of sharing the work with our already impoverished fellow citizens. The blessing of technological unemployment, I call it. But the system of modern capitalism, which pays the laborer only while he works and lets him work while he produces at a profit for the owner of the machine, is endeavoring to change a blessing into a curse. Second, there is the inescapable conclusion that capitalism tends to concentrate all profits into the purses of machine owners and to scatter poverty all over the face of the earth. It is a peculiar poverty, if you will. It is a poverty which forces humanity to stand helplessly starving before the baker's shop window with its plenitude of good things. Now you are interested in learning for what principles the National Union for Social Justice stands when confronted with the problems and abuses which have grown out of capitalistic mass productionism. 1. We maintain that it is not only the prerogative, but it is also the duty of government to limit the amount of profits acquired by an industry. 2. We maintain that it is the function of government to see that industry is so operated that every laborer engaged therein will secure those goods which will be sufficient to supply all needs for an honest livelihood. 3. We further maintain that it is the duty of government to secure the production of all those industrial goods, food, wearing apparel, homes, drugs, books, and all modern conveniences, which the wealth of the nation, the natural resources of the land, and the technical ability of our scientists are able to produce until all honest human needs within this nation are amply supplied. This principle is contrary to the theory of capitalism. Capitalism produces for a profit to the individual owner. Social justice advocates the production for use at a profit for the national welfare as well as for the owner. 4. We maintain the principle that there can be no lasting prosperity if free competition exists in any industry. Therefore, it is the business of government not only to legislate for a minimum annual wage and a maximum working schedule to be observed by industry, but also so to curtail individualism that, if necessary, factories shall be licensed and their output shall be limited. For it is not in accordance with social justice that the owner of an industry will so operate his factory as to destroy free competition and thereby use his private property to the detriment of society. 5. It is the aim of the National Union for Social Justice to assist in the re-establishment of vocational groups. By this I mean that the laboring class who practice the same trade or profession should combine in units independent, if they so choose, of the factory where they work or of the industry in which they are employed. May I expand upon this point? At present, we have approximately 45 million citizens who are eligible to join forces in unionized labor. At the most, there are no more than 6 million persons identified with labor unions. In other words, just barely more than 12% of the artisans, the mechanics, and the laborers of America are united for common action. Despite the lesson that you have learned over the ages, you do not seem to profit by your years of perpetual betrayal. I mean that you have constantly listened to high-binding politicians speaking their pre-election promises to labor. I mean that you have been constantly deceived. Are you not aware that this so-called democratic country of ours has been controlled by the capitalist and the plutocrat? Have you not learned through bitter experience that no political party seriously cares for your welfare? The mockery of your vote was all that counted. I mean that you have been the victims of class legislation, of legislation devised to protect the rich and the property rights of the rich, legislation which sneered at the poor and at human rights. Diabolical loopholes were written into 1,000 laws to protect the capitalist. I see the Insall case in Chicago last week. Because the little word intent was slipped into law, Mr. Insall will very likely go free. Ingenious devices were set up in as many more laws to entrap the laborer, the farmer, and the uninitiated. Need I ask you to unite? In the past you had not the sagacity to organize among yourselves. But that is not true of the banker, of the industrialist, of the plutocrat. They are organized almost 100% against you for the protection of those very principles of exploitation which have succeeded in reducing more than 70% of our population to a standard of living that is best described as economic slavery. You men and women of the laboring class, you not only have the right to organize, it is your duty to establish vocational groups. In no sense does the National Union for Social Justice wish to overthrow unionism. It is our aim to perfect and to sustain it. It is our aim to uphold vocational unionism. But as long as you good people remain disunited, as long as you fail to agree upon a common basic program, you need never hope to enjoy the inalienable rights of a just and living wage or an equitable share in the bountiful wealth of our nation. The money and the interest arrayed against you are too powerful for your undivided pygmy efforts to succeed. In the past, whether you knew it or not, you were forced to take up arms against each other in an industrial warfare of slave against slave, a warfare more heinous in its results of human suffering than was the Civil War which disgraced our nation. 6. It is the aim of the National Union for Social Justice to so work towards a reform in government that the Department of Labor shall not only protect labor, but also shall counsel and guide it in its negotiations with capital. What part has this Department of Labor played in your lives? For years it has joined hands with the banking fraternity and knelt before the shrine of the Department of Commerce to learn its lessons from the directors of capitalism as to how it could perpetuate a department of slavery. For years this branch of our government has been the most inefficient, hypocritical, and fore-flushing department in operation at Washington. Even during the automobile strike in Detroit last year, the head of the department was speaking at $400 an hour here or elsewhere, when she should have been in Washington. Ordinarily it was presided over by a sphinx who dared not open his mouth in defense of labor. Silently, the Secretary of Labor sat in his office while the unemployment increased, while the coal miners slaved in the pits, while the textile industry sweat blood out of children and women, while long hours and short wages were the portion of millions of our citizens, and while wealth was concentrated in the hands of a few. The Department of Labor was the Department of Slavery. It was the department which exacted from the laboring man 12 months of taxation, while it permitted him to work for 6 months of starvation. Now do not misunderstand me. I am not advocating that you form a labor party any more than I am upholding the existence of the capitalist party, which has been in power under the Wilsons and the Hardings throughout the years. We had enough class legislation under capitalism. I am not advocating class legislation to favor the laborer and to disparage the capitalist. All I am asking you is that you unite to obtain social justice. 7. The seventh principle, the National Union for Social Justice, contends that strikes and lockouts are absolutely unnecessary. For in the case of disagreement between employer and employee, it is the business of the public authority to intervene and settle such disputes, which can be settled amicably by the parties involved. For it is our observation that both strikes and lockouts have occasioned more harm to the common good of the nation than any benefit which has been derived. But in the case of the government's neglecting its duty to settle such industrial disputes, always keeping in mind that there is no settlement without a just and living wage for the laborer and an equitable distribution of profits to all, then there is nothing left except for the united labor to refuse to sell its services at a loss just the same as it is unreasonable to expect the farmer to plow his ground and sow his seeds at a loss. Strikes have been most unprofitable for the common welfare of this nation. Strikes were not necessary had labor been organized and had the industrialists learned that their welfare was associated not with the financiers, but with the men employed in their factories. If a government fails to legislate a program of sharing the profits and of supplying the willing working men of this nation with that portion of its abundance with which God has blessed us, then there is no recourse left to the laboring man except to strike until he wins. It is nothing more than the selfsame spirit of 1776 which impelled Washington to strike against taxation without representation. Today it is worse than in 1776 because we have both taxation and starvation without representation. For the past 2 Sundays I have devoted this hour to the various principles associated with a just and living wage. After all, they are the only principles irrelevant and useless in themselves unless they are reduced to practice. And this putting of them into practice is definitely dependent upon your organizing. Bear in mind that there is arrayed against you an army of wealth more powerful than the combined forces of Caesar, Napoleon, and Foch. To ask or expect reform from this force is like asking a hungry lion with a lamb beneath its paws to subscribe to the beauties of vegetarianism. No reform, no social justice shall come except you wrest it from the hands of the exploiters by your united moral force. There is no need for revolution in this country, but there is need to break down the obstacles which prevent our normal evolution. Capitalism, as we know it, must depart. No better than communism, it seeks to identify all wealth in the hands of a few. The communist claims all for the state and none for the individual. The capitalist claims all for his class and none for the laborer or the farmer as he gains control over the state. Social justice seeks and demands a just distribution of the nation's wealth and a just distribution of the profits for the laborer as well as for the industrialist. Capitalism and communism both destroy private ownership. Social justice seeks to multiply it. It is yours. It is yours to struggle for.